this really human superpower that we're born to run. I say this a lot and people are very skeptical. I wasn't a collegiate runner. I ran recreationally, mostly to stay kind of fit. And I don't think I'm a particularly talented runner, just lots of hard work and setting small goals. So he starts off doing this 50K called Antelope Island 50K, which is Antelope Island's an island in the middle of Salt Lake. It's pretty amazing. It has bison. It looks like this prehistoric island. So it's like a 50K lap. And again, I finished. I thought that'll be it. I'll never need to do an ultra again. Like, oh, that was fun. Maybe I could do a 50 miler. So the next year, do a 50 miler. And then 100 miles sounded pretty insane to me. But eventually, you're like, well, I'll do it once. That's how you always convince yourself. I'll just do it once. And so ended up doing this race in Utah called the Bear 100, which goes through kind of the Wasatch Mountains. Just amazing, beautiful race. Although it's one that most people consider one of the hardest hundreds in the world. This is my first 100. Usually people start off with a very easy 100. I didn't know that. So I just started with one of the hardest 100s out there. That was fun. So I'll do like the Wasatch 100 the next year. And I heard of these 200-mile races, which is how fast forward to 2019 and me starting doing these runs for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. I was like, all right, Moab, I love Moab. I lived in Utah. That was my favorite place. And I said, this will be like running through paradise, but I'm only going to do it once. And this will be it. Along the way, I'd read about this race, Badwater, which is 135 miles that starts at Badwater Basin in Death Valley in July. So the hottest place on the earth at the hottest time of the year. And you finish in Whitney Portal. I remember reading about that, like people like Scott Jurek doing it. And I thought, no way, those guys are superhuman. And then next thing you know, I did that. And then you're in Italy running through the Alps. It was a progression over many, many years. I would always have a smaller goal. And a lot of times I thought that was the goal. And then I realized maybe it's like the idea of using that mountaintop analogy. A lot of times the mountains, frustrating thing is false summits. You're like, I'm at the summit. Oh, no, this isn't the summit. It's actually over there. And then you get there and, oh, this is another false summit. So it's like those smaller goals were false summits. And I don't know, maybe Tour de France was the actual summit. It's hard to imagine doing anything more challenging than that.
Gabe Peterson, welcome to Titans of Transition.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. This is going to be a hoot.
Now, this is one of the things I do on the side. You and I are in the same CIO, Chief Information Officers network. I do recall recently you mentioning on the side that you had done some extreme sport events, and we'll get to that. But I just want to ask you a little bit about your background. So you were in the Navy, isn't that right?
Yeah. So straight out of high school, I enlisted in the U.S. Navy. So I grew up in a kind of small town in Northern California. And I was very intrigued by the Navy recruiting poster and joined the Navy, see the world. So I thought it was kind of a good way for me to get some good life experience. I also came from a pretty modest background. So my parents were like, if you want to go to college, good luck.
Yeah, I know.
So the GI Bill was also really compelling. So they lived up to the recruiting poster. By the time I'd been in the Navy a year, I had circumnavigated the globe.
Wow.
I was in the tail end of the Persian Gulf War. It was actually kind of funny when I came back. I was in E2, which is like the second lowest ranked in the military, but I had like 3 rows of ribbons. And at the time, people who had been in the Navy 20 years didn't have 3 rows of ribbons. So see some like old crusty chief who'd been in it 20 years. And he's like, sailor, how did you get 3 rows of ribbon? They sent me the Persian Gulf War.
And you had such a safe job too, right? Tell us about what you were doing on that.
Yeah, I was in F-18 Hornet Squadron. F-18 is the jet the Blue Angels fly. So I worked on the flight deck. I was what's called a crew chief or plane captain, where I basically had one plane that was what I was responsible for the maintenance on. And so I actually had my name on the side of the airplane. It was much lower than where the pilot's was. Where the nose gear is on the door that opened up. It said, Airman Peterson from Ferndale, California.
There you go.
So it was very cool. Not many places, an 18-year-old can be responsible for a $25 million jet, making life and death decisions.
Oh man, so to bring back so many memories of visions of Top Gun, the Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah, that was then.
Did you ever see the group of guys that went out there that did the little dancing action on the flight deck?
I don't remember a lot of dancing, but definitely like the hand signals, 'cause it's so loud, you can't communicate verbally. Like you can't hear it all. So you communicate with hand signals. And when I was in Top Gun, it actually come out, and there weren't a lot of movies on they call it the boat. Even though it's a 5,000 person ship, the boat. So they had they go to a cruise for 6 months and they bring 20 movies. So they play the same movies over and over. You get to where you can memorize the movies. Like Top Gun was one of them, but we'd always laugh because the hand signals are totally out of context and wrong in the movie.
Oh, are they?
They're correct signals, but they're given at the wrong time.
Well, some producer probably thought they looked cool.
It was cool. It's a great shot, but you're like, we'd go, wait, you never do with that.
Well, we'll swing back to that probably a little bit later, but I want to jump right in and kind of in the back of everyone's minds as you're listening, I know there's questions. How does a guy that rose to being in the C-suite, a VP of information technology, have that as part of their life? It's kind of, you envision that as sort of buttoned up, professional, corporate guy. And then, like I said, we were having this meeting, actually it was over Zoom. We're having this meeting and I mentioned that this book I was reading by Dave Goggins, and you went, oh yeah, I've raced with him. And, which is this crazy, ex-SEAL, out of control, extreme, accomplishments physically type guy. He said, yeah, I raced with him.
Yeah. I actually finished a race that he did not finish.
Oh, was it one of the ones where he was running on broken legs and stuff? And
I don't think he had broken legs. He kind of
had other issues.
Altitude issues, I think what he said.
Gotcha.
But I went to the same altitude, didn't have those issues.
Yeah. So let's talk about your last one, which is it's like the mother of all events. It's Tour de la Jance. Is that how you say it?
Tour de Jance.
Tour de Jance.
Italian for Tour of Giants. So it's a approximately 220-mile loop through the Italian Alps. It starts in Courmayeur, which is just, if you've been to Mont Blanc, there's the Mont Blanc tunnel. As soon as you pop out of the Mont Blanc tunnel on the Italian side, that's Courmayeur. It's just very scenic. Looks like, you're in a postcard when you get there. It almost doesn't seem real. Right in the middle of the Alps. A lot of people consider it the toughest mountain race in the world, because it has about 86,000 feet of vertical gain and loss, or about three Everests. If you went up Everest from sea level, it came down 3 times.
And how many miles long or kilometers long is that?
They built it as 330 kilometers, but I actually got 227 miles, so it's a little longer than advertised.
Wow. And in 5 days, is that what it took you to
It took,
complete?
5 days. So the race started on Sunday and I finished Friday night. So it was 135 hours. And in those 135 hours, I slept about a total of 7 hours.
I watched that blog video that you put on your channel. I got to know you a little bit. I mean, I know you professionally, but I got to know you a little bit more because of your self-talk through the whole process. I'm just curious, when you watched it back, did you notice anything in what you said as you narrated that surprised you, or was it pretty much the way you remembered? Or just kind of curious, because sometimes when you're in the middle of going through something, you have one thought in mind, but then when you look back at it, you go, oh, I guess I'm just going to say, I was in better shape than I thought I was, or I was struggling more than I thought it was.
It's probably the opposite. I probably generally thought I was in better shape than I was. That you see on the video. I think at one point he would talk about I'm feeling strong, but I look like I just like I just crawled out of a grave, and I'm like, I feel really good. Like, well, I don't look good for that video.
Well, what I noticed was you were like coaching yourself, because you would say, all right, wow, okay, well, that was interesting, but yeah, okay. So now the next one. yeah, we can do this. I mean, you were kind of keeping yourself encouraged, and that's just sort of, I'm going to park that thought. We can swing back to that, but um, that might be the mode you operate in a lot of different spheres of your life.
Yeah, then there's definitely a lot of transferable lessons to life, the work world, I think. Yeah, in the movie, I try to, a lot of people film like the epic mountains, which is there, you see it.
Yeah.
I try to kind of narrate my internal monologue. So you're hearing generally what I'm thinking, the more like PG-13 version of what I'm thinking.
Did you cut some things out in post? Did you?
There were years where I was like, oh, no, I'm not gonna put that in there.
That's great.
That's a little too much of the 18-year-old sailor.
So this was pretty much the most extreme thing you've done to this point?
Yeah, I would definitely say this was the most extreme thing I've done. And I would say, that's saying a lot because I've done some pretty extreme things. Yeah, a lot of times I look back and I'm surprised, like, oh, I did that. Because if went back 10 plus years, I would have a hard time believing, me from 10 years ago has done this stuff. What started this? Because it wasn't something that started very early in life.
I do want to point out pretty early on that in addition to just doing this passion of yours, you also have a personal mission involved in this too. You're raising funds for a charity. And why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, happy to. So 2019, my oldest daughter, Sky, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which, she's very young and it's just nothing a kid should have to go through, because usually the way they're diagnosed is she ended up in the pediatric ICU and it's a medical mystery, why she's basically passed out and throwing up. Mm-hmm. It didn't take the doctors long to diagnose that she had type 1 diabetes. The upside is, as you get into it, the technology has really improved the quality of life. But when you're in the hospital, they want you to know all the low tech stuff, because what if the technology doesn't work? So they're giving you like the vial and a syringe.
Yeah.
And you're thinking this is going to be the rest of our life, like measuring doses. And then as we leave the hospital, they go, oh, there's a pen where you just dial the dose and give it to her. And then it's 6 months, once you guys are proved you're competent, that you can get an insulin pump where you just punch in the numbers and it'll automatically do the dosage. But I remember the first few weeks were tough, where before every meal, she would have to get a shot. And so it was very complex. We have to calculate like the number of carbs, which actually turned out the endurance sports thing. I knew how to like count carbs because that's really important. You have to fuel. So I guess one of my superpowers is I can look at a plate of food and go, that's about 40 carbs. And I'll usually be within like 10% accurate.
Wow. That's
my wife was like Googling how much is this and this. I'm like, oh, that's about 40 carbs. And she's like, wow, it was 43. You're really close.
It was.
No, for the first few months, they'd come up and show me a plate of food. Like, how many carbs is this?
Yeah.
And then you have to do the injection, which my daughter really, is usually a lot of crying. So her strategy was she would just not eat. And then did the injection.
That's not a good idea.
Yeah. Fast forward now, she's got an insulin pump. It uses technology where it's taking her basically blood sugar reading and adapting. I mean, technology is amazing. That's why, part of why I'm in this career. But at the same time, in 2019, I was doing the Moab 240. This is a race where I beat Goggins.
Yes.
Or as you would say, I took his soul.
Let's see if we can hook him into this video to comment against
go viral.
I know you got into it with Dan Crenshaw there for a while too, so that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I was definitely, I'd read his book and I was aware when he showed up at the registration. I was like, that's Goggins. That's cool. I was in the Navy. People in the Navy are called squids. I was catching up to him until my plan was when I caught up to him, I was going to say, hey, it's 2 squids. Let's have a push-up contest. See who wins. I didn't expect I would win, but I thought that'd be fun. But he ended up dropping out due to some medical issues. But anyway, I thought maybe people would donate to a fundraiser. I don't know. So I set a pretty modest goal. I think, it's 240 miles. So I said, $2,400. If I can hit that, that'd be really amazing. And again, the power of technology. I just put this out on social media. Hey, I'm going to go do this run for my daughter. It'd be great if you donated. And I think like in a day, we blew through $2,400. I can't remember how much we ended up raising for Moab, but it was like $4,000 or $5,000. Since then, every year I pick one race that I dedicate as a fundraiser for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. So their mission is a world without type 1 diabetes. If me doing this crazy, stupid, epic stuff can help in some way, I'm happy to do that. And I found that the more insane the event, the more people are willing to contribute.
Cool.
And it helps me out there because I know I can't quit. All those people contributed. I can't quit for them. I can't quit for my daughter. So those are usually races where I really I need that extra boost of mental resolve that I'm not going to quit, because a lot of these races are 40 or 50% of the people don't finish. Like Tour de Jades, about 50% of the people who started did not finish. And these are the best ultra runners from the entire world. No one shows up lightly to do Tour de Jades. Yeah. Everyone there, like when I talked to them, they had a very, very serious resume. So, just failure is a, very real possibility, which I think makes things exciting.
You see, in a lot of these events, it's going to thin out, but it was really interesting watching your video because in the very beginning, it was so crowded going through those narrow streets that you really couldn't run hard or just was maybe walk. You sometimes had to stop. And then probably about halfway in, you noticed that, or even less than that, you were separating on the skinny trails. And then I think probably 2/3 in or 3/4 in, it was like, hey, I actually could find a place to sleep tonight. Didn't have to sleep on the floor or the ground.
It's really unusual. So ultra running is a sport that has a lot of popularity in Europe. And so you see in the movie, like people were lining the streets, ringing bells, shouting at us. Which one of the things at times it shows is die, which means go. Which like on day 3 or 4, when someone's shouting die, you go,
no, wait a minute.
And then sometimes they realize like, oh, he's an American that day, and they know me like, don't say that to him.
Oh gosh, that's hilarious. Wow.
But so you don't have ultras like that where it starts with, it was 2 waves, and each wave was about 500 runners. Like the biggest ultras in the US are 500 runners, and that's like half of Tour de Jades. And you don't get that kind of crowd mojo at an ultra. It's more like if you're doing Boston Marathon or something like that. Yeah. So that was really cool.
So one of the things that I want to bring out is this incremental improvement concept. But before we tie that into this extreme events that you've been doing, let's pivot back. You were talking about the technical aspects of helping your daughter manage her diabetes and doing the manual injections and then the insulin pump and the feedback with the monitoring. You have a scientific background, which I found out also. I have a degree in chemistry and a minor in physics. You do as well. So let's pivot to your initial career. This is supposed to be about transitions, this podcast, and talk a little bit about your transitions and how they came up. You graduated from Berkeley with that degree. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's right. So got out of the Navy, which is in some ways a hard decision because I actually enjoyed the Navy in a lot of ways as an adventure. And I could have seen myself being a career Navy guy. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened, but life's turned out pretty good for me. So I used the GI Bill. I started up in a small college in Northern California where I grew up, and then I transferred into Berkeley. And so a couple of transitions there, just going from the military back to school. And I had this very exciting, dangerous job. And then all of a sudden life's kind of boring again. You're studying. I ended up responsible for a team on the flight deck, and I was responsible for myself. So it's kind of like, for me, it was almost, not, for want of a better word, relaxing, enjoyable. Like going to college, I'm just responsible for myself. Everyone else there is super stressed, especially when I got to Berkeley. It's a very competitive environment. You do the orientation, and they're like, how many of you were the salutatorian or valedictorian in your high school? And like half the people raise their hands. And when I was in high school, I didn't even know I was going to go to college.
Wow.
And you talk to a lot of the students there and they're like, they'd been groomed from the time they were 12 that they were going to go to Berkeley. And I'm like, I decided I was going to go to college on my 21st birthday when we just pulled out of Hong Kong. And I said, if I don't take my shot now, that might not come again. So I'm going to get out of the Navy and use the GI Bill. It's just GI Bill and a lot of hustle. I was able to put myself through Berkeley.
So just real quick, interrupting you, I'm sorry, but you said something there. How did you come to the point where you felt like you had to make that decision at that point in time? You were getting close to the end of your initial commitment. Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was kind of either re-enlist for another 4 years. And I had orders. I wanted to be an air traffic controller, which can be a lucrative civilian career too. It's hard to get into that school, and I had orders to go to air traffic controller school. So on the one hand, I had a very sure thing, like this sets me up for a nice life. But for me, I felt like I could do more. I could take my shot because, I worked with the pilots and I knew them, pretty well. You see them off the boat, have a beer, and thought, what's the difference between me, turning the wrench on the airplane? It's hard to imagine now, but I used to have mechanics hands. We have the grease in the crevices of your hands. Mm-hmm. I said, what's the difference between me with the greasy hands and this pilot? And it's like, well, that guy got a philosophy degree from Ohio State, so he gets to fall in the airplane. And I try to read that. I go, I'm at least as smart as these guys. I need to take my shot. So I figured, worst case, I could always re-enlist back in the Navy, but I would kick myself if I didn't take my shot. So it was kind of a big leap to just like, I'm going to give up this sure thing that would give me a pretty good life and go back to college, and who knows what happens there.
Okay, so your life changed. You're on the Berkeley campus, which is kind of an elite. I'll just say, I don't know if it was the same time frame, but I did have a CIO, IT leadership post in Berkeley. So I visited that campus a number of times for meetings, and my nephew went there as well. So I'm pretty familiar with it. And that's a big shift, culturally.
Yeah, from the Navy to Berkeley.
Yes. So I imagine you just put your head down and just focused and grounded out for the remaining 2 years or whatever, however many years?
For the junior and senior year.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I always tried to make time also to enjoy the experience because I was an older student. By the time I was there, I was in my mid-20s. And like I said, I had an appreciation for it that, hey, life's not really like this where you're just responsible for yourself, where your job is to enrich yourself and take tests. Right. A lot of the students were very stressed about it. I'm like, no one's going to die. I had a job where I could actually die if I made the wrong decision.
Yes.
So,
exactly.
I definitely worked hard. The usual pattern was all the problem sets for physics and chemistry were due on Fridays. So I would stay up all night Thursday, getting those done and hand them in. I'm like, I was due at noon. So like 11:58, I'm there. But then I was like, oh, well, I'm, the weekend, I have some time to go enjoy the Bay Area. So I want to go. Just a huge value of Berkeley is all the people you meet there. I consider myself kind of an extrovert. So I just meeting people, learning their stories, and having a really unusual background there. They grew up kind of poor in the small town in Northern California that had been in the Navy. That wasn't the usual story.
Unique. Definitely.
There were not many older students. It was usually like the age of the grad students. Usually people thought I was a grad student.
So the next transition came when you had to get a real job, right?
When I graduated, I did some research. I did an internship at the Stanford Linear Accelerator, which again was another kind of pinch yourself moment when I had my old 1960 Volkswagen Bug that I bought saving up from a cruise in the Navy. And I drive onto the Stanford campus, and it was like something I'd never imagined for myself. It was just like going on the Berkeley campus. Like, I can't believe this is my life. But the thing I realized was research was not my passion. I definitely enjoyed science, but the actual research, it turns out all the interesting chemistry seems to happen at like 3 a.m. in some sort of concrete bunker by yourself. And I like
by
working.
yourself. Yeah.
I didn't get energized by doing it. And it was kind of the tail end of the .com era, late 90s. So I thought I could maybe move into technology, but I still want to stay involved in science because it's important for me. So I ended up finding a job at a software company that makes scientific software for the pharmaceutical industry, which kind of put me on this whole path of life sciences, informatics, and IT.
Were you a developer?
Kind of worked in professional services. I guess the way I got the job was they were trying to make a chemistry-based product and found they couldn't teach the programmers chemistry. And so they wanted to see if they could teach, chemists programming. And it turned out I knew super useful programming languages like Fortran. But speaking of transition, though, I basically walk in and they're like, "Hey, our product uses Oracle database," and I'm like,
"Oh, there you go.
What's an Oracle database? I've never heard of that." They're like, "It's fine. Here's the book. Read the book, and then start programming next week." Okay. So it was a great experience for learning ability. Yeah, they're like, "Okay, hey, we have an engagement where this customer wants a chemistry data warehouse, and you're flying out there on Monday." Okay, I better read that book. You're on the plane, like, all right. And then you have to present yourself as the expert, and you're going to learn you're making a lot of mistakes. So, that's one lesson I've picked up from my life is being willing to fail. Like I mentioned, a lot of these races, there's a very high probability of actually failing, but I think that makes it more exciting.
Not everyone is like that. There's a lot of people in this world who have fabulous contributions to whatever endeavor they're in, but I wouldn't call them risk takers. I would say that certainly they can move into other areas. I'll say grow into other areas, but jumping into something that they don't have structure and they don't have a kind of a base competency in it is something they aren't willing to do. And so I think thematically here, I'm starting to see a thread that this is one attribute you have in your wiring, in your natural gifting or wiring that has played out in multiple different areas of your career and your life. Is that, like you said earlier on, when you were making the decision to go to Berkeley, it was like, well, I figured I would take my shot at it. Or, as we'll probably learn later on, how you got into your endurance sports is you just went for it. And so the length of that stretch for that kind of a transition, people have different tolerance levels for that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's intrinsic, or it's maybe something that having that early experience in the Navy where you learn how to take risks and maybe learn how to even enjoy taking risks. Get used to taking risks, or maybe you're born with it. I'm not sure, but it's definitely there. And I think for the most part, it's led to a lot of interesting, what I call misadventures. My YouTube channel called Gabe's Misadventures.
Misadventures, yeah.
They're not always adventures. Sometimes they're misadventures. So often they're misadventures. But just be willing to accept this isn't going to go the way the movie's playing out in my head.
Right. So then you were at that company and then you went forward. The next transition came when or how? How did you actually get into IT management?
It was kind of a long and indirect road. Like I've said, my life's kind of a series of happy accidents. So I was more on the software development, informatics side. I worked in early discovery, pharmaceutical discovery at Pfizer. Did what now would be called data science, and kind of progressed so that I ended up working in every phase of pharmaceutical R&D over series of years. It sounds really short-winded to say it. Worked in discovery at Pfizer, preclinical at Amgen, and then started the clinical informatics team at City of Hope, which is one of the top cancer research hospitals in the world. And so each of those was a big transition. People generally would specialize in one of those areas and make that their whole career. For me, it was kind of like, what's the new challenge? After doing that, I was kind of like, well, I've worked in every phase of R&D. What's next? And so I like to joke that I went to the dark side of IT. I figured, I'd learn a lot, and it'd be one of those kind of jobs where you could do it anywhere. Whereas our industry is largely based in a handful of locations, so you're committed to living in one of those. Luckily for me now, one of those locations is San Diego, which is San Diego does not suck.
Is that a T-shirt? Sure.
Yeah, I'd make that the marketing slogan. You've probably heard that a lot on my movie. Some of my friends joke that it should be a drinking game. Every time I say something like, this view does not suck. You have to drink. um, so I ended up heading up information systems at a medical device company that was actually based in Utah, and it was a spinoff from a much larger company. So it was kind of a, new area, doing something that most companies would take 18 months to do, a spinoff like that. And I think we had about half that time. So I had to build up the entire IS team, implement all the systems the new company would need, everything from an ERP with SAP to HR system, Workday, customer relationship management, Salesforce. These are things I'd never done before. I do kind of what they did, but it was kind of like...
there's not a theme here? I'm still seeing there being sort of a theme.
Yeah, okay. It's something I haven't done.
Let's go for it.
I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but generally trying to learn from them and not repeat them. So that was a good learning experience. Just, working in a lot of different areas of the business. The company was heavily based in GMP, or good manufacturing practices. And I'd never done that. So I learned all about the plant and just doing things like Gemba walks, and was able to bring kind of the flavor that I learned of Agile with a capital A, introduce Agile to the organization. And so by the time I left, a lot of the manufacturing teams were having daily stand-ups where they had a scrum board.
People not in the industry, that's a big shift, because typically in these highly regulated fields, things move slowly when it comes to development. You're in what they call the old waterfall method.
I was kind of an early adopter way back in the early 2000s as a software developer, and there were some of the early flavors of Agile, like extreme programming, and eventually Scrum kind of took over. And for me, that's something I brought to every company. So I said, well, this works in the software world. We're making hardware medical device products.
Right.
There's no reason it shouldn't work.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of resistance to that. Well, I understand why that worked for you software guys, but that's not going to work for hardware. But it's all about people. It's not really about what the product you're delivering. It's about how humans work together in teams to be highly productive. And so I said, okay, well, let's try the experiment. You have a product development team. I have a scrum master. He'll take you through one 2-week sprint, and we'll see what happens. And I got one of the VPs of R&D to agree to that. I think probably expected it to fail. And 2 weeks later, he said that team got more done in 2 weeks than they would usually get done in 2 months.
Yeah.
And they were sold. The best way to sell people, show them. And so I ended up doing a lot more beyond the classic, IT role, whereas really helping a lot with the business transformation, and ended up leading business projects that really had almost nothing to do with technology. Because I noticed that you guys want a tool problem, or a tool solution, but you have a process problem. Let's fix that. And then we'll give you the technology you need. So there's a lot of just using Agile and digging into it to like, what's the problem? How do we solve it in bite-sized chunks? So one of the analogies I use between mountain running and the work world is we're going to the mountaintop. So the classic waterfall approach would be, I can tell you we will be at the mountaintop at 8:42 a.m. on this date. And it will look exactly like this.
It never happens.
It never happened. I have a Gantt chart that shows you on this exact moment, we will land on the mountaintop.
And it doesn't matter how many tiny tick marks you have on your Gantt chart. It doesn't make it any more accurate.
None of the Gantt charts are ever reality. So it's like, hey, we know we're going to get to the mountaintop, but the first step is we got to get to the base of the mountain. And then we find the trail, and then we know there's a trail there. We don't know much about the trail, but then the next milestone is we're going to get to like the stream that's up the mountain. And while we learn this trail is really different than we expected, it's a lot steeper. So we need to adapt our approach. That same approach, I think, is really what that kind of the Agile philosophy of small bite-sized chunks. You have big goals, but if I focused on the finish of Tour de France, I don't think I would make it, because I'd just be mentally overwhelming to know I've got 5 more days of being out there in the mountains running. It was always what's the next thing?
When I coach leaders, I often pick up on a problem when people get stuck just because of that one comment you made. It becomes overwhelming. because they're so focused on the sort of the long range or the outcome that they want. And it's good to have a vision. It's good to have a directional, a vector. I'm talking physics now towards where you want to go. But the problem is your vision is just not that great when you start things out. And if you over analyze and think about the destination, it becomes extremely discouraging along the way. And you find out that the journey, the way you plotted it out, is not at all like the journey that you have to take. And it's a lot like climbing a mountain or going up a mountain where, if you're way back in the valley floor, you can see the ultimate destination. That's your long range outcome plan, the peak. But when you get up close, you go up to base camp and you go up to the first shoulder, you can't even see the peak. There's like 3 or 4 other lower peaks in the way, other shoulders that you have to go across. And your vantage point from the floor of the valley doesn't appreciate the journey along the way. It's a mindset thing that I think is illustrated in your journey, both on the corporate side and also in the athletic achievements you've made. This comes up a lot, and it's very helpful for people to reframe things. To say, yeah, I still have that long range goal, but for today, and this came out of your video because you kept saying, today, this is my goal. Or even if I can just make it down this hill in the dark without falling off the cliff and dropping my poles, or then I'll be good.
Yeah.
And we'll go, and then we'll see.
Yeah. Focus on the next milestone. That ultra mindset is very transferable because in the ultra, there's definitely times where you want to focus on what is that goal? Like your motivation is low.
Right.
Like, why am I doing this? I think about like my daughter, the more like, why am I doing this to myself? And I ask myself that a lot in Tour de Gens. Why am I doing this to myself? And then you focus on the why, the big picture. But mostly it was like, I just need to focus on, I'm getting to the next town where there is an aid station and I'll get to have a bowl of pasta or something.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking any farther than that, because if I think like, oh God, 200 more miles to go, that's
Exactly.
just overwhelming. I would just, you can't eat that elephant all in one bite.
Right. And I think of people, when they think about their careers, sometimes it can be the same way. They're like, oh, I have this goal that I want to get to this certain level, but for the past, 6 months, I haven't moved an inch. Well, that's 6 months. All right, let's keep going. When did you start your, I'm just wondering how long these two aspects of your life are running concurrently. When did you start running, and what was your first race? How long was it?
Really, this all started when I was turning 40, about 10 years ago. I turned 50 this month.
So you've only been doing this for 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was very active after the Navy. I always ran, but recreationally. I had done a couple of marathons, but not at all competitively. Always just the goal of, I'm going to finish, and it'd be like a 4.5 hour marathon, which, congratulations to everyone who does that. That's not a competitive marathon. Sorry. I can't do anyone. Yeah, I'd always been pretty active. I backpacked and things like that. I think it was kind of when I was turning 40, I really had this epiphany, like, hey, I need to take my shot.
There's that phrase again.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's only going to get harder. I'm 40. It's only going to get harder. And it was kind of a series of small goals. When I turned 40, I said, hey, I'll do a half Iron triathlon. For people who don't know, it's a 1.2 mile swim, 56 mile bike ride, and then a half marathon, which to me at that time sounded just insane. I had run pretty steadily, but recreationally, not particularly fast. I thought I could swim because I was in the Navy. But it turns out I could just not die in the water for a very long time. I could freestyle swim very fast. So I basically had to be an adult onset swimmer, learn how to actually properly freestyle swim. I would say I'm still a little not great there. And then I hadn't ridden a bike in 20 years. So I went to the local bike shop, bought a bike, and started learning everything that you need to do know about cycling. And so I did it. There's this race called Super Frog, which actually here in San Diego, I was living in the Pasadena area at the time. And I think I liked it because it was connected to the Navy. It was actually a race that was started by the Navy SEALs. And
Frogman.
it held on the BUDS course where they go through basically the SEAL boot camp. And they have pictures of fallen SEALs there. So it was very like, all right, this connects to my past. But my mentally, I was like, this is one and done. I'll do this. I'll hang the bike up on the garage wall and I'll have bragging rights for the rest of my life. So I got to the finish line. I was like, wow, that was really fun. I should do an Ironman. And sure enough, next year did Ironman Arizona. It just kind of kept progressing from there. And then the ultra started when that medical device company was based in Salt Lake City, Utah. So around 2014, moved up to Utah. Again, I had no connection to Utah, no family, no religious connection. I'd been there a few times and I thought, it was an undiscovered gem. It was before social media. Now people know Utah is amazing. We got in before everyone knew that. I remember posting pictures of Utah and I'm up in the mountains. They're like, where is that? Are you in Colorado? I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm in Utah. And they're like, oh, Utah doesn't have mountains. It's just a flat desert. Like, no, it had the most amazing mountains in the world. So that was when I got into ultras. I lived right at the base of a mountain. And I actually read Born to Run, which, I love that book. The whole thesis is this is humans. This is our superpower. We're literally born to run. Humans can routinely outrun horses in races. And so the idea is that we're much more heat adapted than any other species on the planet. People like to think of the minimalist shoe thing that came out of Born to Run, which is also one of the themes. I don't buy into that part.
Well, I mean, you can talk about feeling the next goal, but I wonder if it's not the next goal, but it's the fact that you're pushing yourself, that you're feeling like, I'm going to take the shot or I'm going to go for it. There's this disquiet in you for just sort of sitting and being comfortable where you are. And I don't mean that in a negative way,
It's mostly positive. There are times where I'm like, why can't I be like most people and just be comfortable?
Right. So let's try to glean some lessons here. Wow. I mean, there's so much. What are some things that are positive lessons for growth and for moving forward in one's life that you can glean from both of these venues, if you will, or both of these situations?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap. I'd say the when we talked about setting goals, because a lot of these are long-term goals. When people come to me and they're like, hey, I want to do a 200-mile race. And like, okay, where are you at? Well, I ran a half marathon. Okay, you're looking at like a 3-year goal, but I want to do it like in 6 months. All right, you might be able to drag yourself through a 200-mile race in 6 months, but it's not going to be fun.
You'll be in the hospital.
Yeah,
afterwards.
Your chances of success are going to be low. Your chance of injury going to be high. Like this is something you need to build to over years. So work is, is the same way. You're setting goals. Some of them are very nebulous. Like we want to go to this mountaintop and maybe it's shrouded in clouds. We can't even see it. We know it's there, but we don't know what it looks like. Definitely. I also say that kind of agile mindset of doing things in small bite-sized chunks. And one of the things I like about agile is it's an empirical control framework, or it's using the scientific approach. I have an idea, I try it, and I find out really fast whether it succeeded or failed. So a lot of times in training,
isn't it by its very nature time boxed?
Yeah, so you're doing it in a short span of time. In Agile, it's usually a 1 to 4 week spreads. So it's kind of that same idea with training is you do this, what's called periodizer training, where it could be a goal in this block. My goal is to get faster. And I'll objectively be able to measure whether I'm faster because I'll go out and run like a 5K time trial. And I either ran a faster 5K or I didn't. So that training approach either worked or it didn't. And so I did a lot of, self-experimentation on what kind of worked and a lot of what didn't.
So that framework, then you apply when working with your team, I'm sure, that there is maybe from the business, you get a sort of, I'll say somewhat nebulous goal sometimes, or what would appear to be unrealistic at times. But do you apply the same sort of thinking and mental model to mapping out the course on your professional side?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of parallels. I mean, some are, I'd say that where it's really different a lot of times is running is more individual. Sure, it's
Yeah.
you're part of a community, but it's really about, what yourself.
You have control of everything,
Yeah.
sort of.
Which is sometimes is worse because we're not honest with ourselves a lot. And so the classic is you'll get someone who has this running goal and you're like, okay, it's really easy to see if you're going to have a chance of, I want to do, say, a sub 3 hour marathon. Okay,
Right.
go run a half marathon. And if you can do it in this time, like an hour and 20 minutes or something like that, you can probably run a sub 3. And you go, what's your fastest half marathon? Well, I've done a 2 hour half marathon. Okay.
It's a long way.
Yeah, you got work to do. So sometimes it's harder doing it by yourself because, and I think this is why coaching is important in athletics, is you have someone who's giving you that feedback. Like, okay, I hear your goal. You want to get to 3 hour marathon. You're at more like a 4 hour marathon now. Here's what we have to do to get you there. That's probably like a 2 or 3 year goal of really focusing on running a marathon that fast. Using the marathon analogy because, people kind of understand marathons. A lot of people run them. Whereas the teamwork it work as a team, and it's more, I think there are a lot more variables. And it's a team that you don't necessarily, it's a, hybrid team. Some people are part of my team. They're my direct reports. So I have some ability to directly influence what they do, but most of the products we roll out are not for the technology team. They're for the business unit, like scientists doing research in the lab. So when they come to me with those unrealistic goals, I want to run a 200-mile race. But my most recent thing is, I've run a half marathon. And you go, okay, well, here's what, the work we have to put in. Oh, I'm too busy to put in that kind of work, but I still want that goal. So I put in some early tests to see, are they really committed? I want to do this project. I'm like, okay, here's what it's going to take from your team. We need a product owner, someone from your team who can really drive the vision for this product. Oh, I don't have anyone that can do that who's not busy. Okay, that's fine. I totally understand it. But we can't do that project right now. You're not committed to this project that you won't give me a product owner.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll need. We'll need a product owner. We'll need people to be a part of this team developing this product. But they're too busy. I totally understand it, but we won't be successful. And I want to invest in projects where we're going to be successful for our company.
It seems so obvious, but I would say, based on my experience, that's probably one of the easiest places that technology leaders can trip up, because they want to say yes to something. They want to be helpful. And in the end of the day, they're not going to be helpful because there are realities to what it takes to get certain things accomplished. And so that's really great advice. The other thing I wanted to pivot to, unless you want to spend a little more time on that, is just the importance of mindset and how that, and maybe it's a little bit more of a general lessons learned and advice for those who are on the journey, but the importance of mindset in both venues, both areas.
Yeah, I think there's some overlap. Definitely. Yeah, I think the ultra mindset, like I was talking about, of knowing when to focus on your big goal. Like, hey, you're losing motivation. You should, why are you doing this? But if you're like, I just need to get up the side of this mountain, or I need to learn this new programming language, focusing on the why can be overwhelming. So you focus on the task. So in ultras, there's a lot of understanding when to focus on the why versus when to focus on the task. So, it's 2 a.m. and you haven't slept in 3 days. That's a really bad time to focus on the why. You're going to go to a dark place. Just focus on the task. Like, my job is to get to this next mountain pass. And then from there.
So maybe there's times to opine and then there's times to grind.
Yeah. There's a lot of grinding. That's in the video. I actually referred to that a bunch of times because that was.
Yes, I remember.
Me and a friend did the John Muir Trail during COVID because all the races were canceled. So it's a 211-mile trail.
That's Northern California, right?
Yeah, in the Sierra Mountains. So we did it northbound, started from Mount Whitney to Yosemite Valley. And we ended up actually setting the fastest known time on the route that we took, although we didn't know it at the time. So I joked that I have the fastest known old dude time. So we come in as ultra runner, very kind of cocky, like, oh, this will be easy. It ended up being probably one of the hardest things I've done maybe just a little below Tour de Jobs. But anyway, you get in through hiking, there's a tradition, you get a trail name. You don't go by your regular name in the civilian world. And so my trail name was Grinder because my friend, he was really fast. He would shoot up to the pass and then he'd take breaks. Whereas I would just keep going. I get to the pass and I didn't need a break. Let's just keep going. And so it's like, man, you just grinding it out. Or he's like more like a rabbit sprinting to the next
It
pause.
feels like a time to talk about the tortoise and the hare, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of just grinding it out, which I talked about a lot in that video. Like it was just time to grind it out. So I think there are times in life where you just have to do things that are fun and they're to help you get to this goal. And I think overall enjoying the adventure and making sure it's fun in the work context. I generally want for my teams, like work should be fun most days when we show up. We should be having fun. I know there's some companies that take that as a really bad sign that you're not serious. And I don't want to work for those companies anymore.
If you don't look like you've been going through the torture chamber with misery on your face, then you must not be committed. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think so. I think we probably both worked for that kind of company.
Yeah.
Where you run into someone and they tell you like how busy they are and how hard everything is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's just like the company's culture is everyone's telling each other how difficult things are. Versus more like hey, we're here to discover new drugs. And that's a really cool thing that we get to do. We get to discover new medicines that help patients sometimes with untreated diseases. Like that's amazing. So it's really cool to get to be part of that in a some small way.
Well, that's part of mindset too, is understanding the overall context. And this gets back to the vision part, taking time to appreciate where you are and that you are in a spot that you feel good about. The other thing I want to chat about real briefly is to ask you the question, have you ever been in a situation where you were tasked to do something and it just wasn't really your natural strength to do?
Yeah, I think a lot of those, where I was asked to do something and I'm like, okay, I've never done anything like that before. Like when I was at the medical device company, there were a lot of folks who'd been there a long time. And so they're very invested in the way things were. I was new. So the CEO asked me like, hey, we have this problem shipping our products on time. Can you look into it? I'm like, I don't know anything about manufacturing. He's like, that's okay. You seem to have a good like critical thinking skill set. Just go see what you identify. I said, okay, I'll play Agile. We'll do sprints, get a cross-functional team together, identify what the problems are, and then start attacking the problems. And then, flash forward a few months, we've implemented a whole sales and operations planning process, or S&OP. It started off, I couldn't even spell S&OP, but just had to learn along the way and really take advantage of that team that kind of collectively we're much smarter than any of us are individually.
Yeah. So that's great. Are there any closing ideas you have in terms of lessons learned that would be helpful for folks tuning in? This is the question I ask in all my podcasts. If you were to turn the clock back and be able to speak to yourself when you were 25 years old or whatever, what sage advice would you give yourself?
Well, that's a tough question. I'm very grateful for the life I've had. Growing up, I wouldn't have thought I'd be talking about any of this stuff. I think I enjoyed the journey. I'm a 25-year-old, so I'm just starting to appreciate it. I was in a unique experience where I was at Berkeley and I can appreciate how amazing this was. I had so many peers who this was a grind for them. It was so horrible. Like you're one of the best universities in the world, and this is going to open up so many doors for your future. Just enjoy that journey. Like I said, have fun. And also one of the things I've learned is hubris is rarely rewarded in sports and also in life. I think wherever I've had major setbacks, definitely in sports, where I got cocky, like, I've done this race, so I don't really need to prepare for this other race. I can just show up and go beast mode. That usually is the few DNFs I've had. That is almost always how that story played out. And it was always like, all right, this. I need to stay humble. It doesn't matter. This race doesn't care that I did these other races. I need to respect that this is a really hard race. So same thing in life. I think trying to stay humble and keeping that learning mindset. I mean, this, we both had the same career in technology. Most of our career is actually not about technology. It's about getting people to change. And I think it's because at some point we lose that growth mindset. And we start saying things like, this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
Well, the reason we should keep doing it in the future.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. And you danced around a little model that we talk about a lot in this field, people, process, technology. And it's interesting. Most of the time we get recruited into jobs to help an organization based upon technology understanding and knowledge and experience, maybe some process. But over time, we've both chatted about this, that kind of one of the biggest levers is how you influence people. That's leadership. And how you get openness. Examples of you bringing in Agile is just one of several examples that came out in this episode. But really, that is huge. Yes, you have to have your technology chops on. You have to have understanding, but understanding how to serve the organization, serve the other leaders that you're peers with or you report to, and how to motivate and coach your team is kind of what really makes or breaks long-term success, I think. So that's a great reminder. But hey, listen, it's been so much fun talking to you. Any final closing thoughts?
No, I really enjoyed this conversation, Joe. It's interesting. I usually talk about one or the other, so it's kind of the blend of professional and athletics.
Hopefully that'll come through okay with the episode. You're on LinkedIn. People can find you there. We'll put in the notes if Gabe wants to expose how you can be reached. But definitely we will point to that episode. I don't know. It might be an hour long or something like that.
About 55 minutes.
It is really cool. I mean, it's just amazing. And again, it's an amazing accomplishment. So kudos to you for that. But also just listening to your inner dialogue, I think is really powerful because, there's a lot there to unpack. So anyway, thanks again, Gabe, for being on Titans of Transition.
Yeah. Great discussing my adventures and misadventures.
Misadventures. I love it. Yeah. All right, man. Take care.
All right. You too. Bye.
Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information.